Cocktail history is such a slippery slope. You have PR departments of Bacardi, let's say, or these brands going back 100 years, wanting you to believe that it was Bacardi used in the original Daiquiri and it was created at this bar in Santiago. They want you to believe their Madison Avenue type of stories.
Thank you for listening to Serves You Right. My name is Andrew, and if this is your first time tuning in, I've spent the last 20 years in the hospitality world, working at restaurants and predominantly bars, my personal favorite. Done everything from bar back all the way up to bartender, head bartender, bar manager, and now GM. And I bring that up because today I'm speaking to a legend in the bar world, Philip J. Greene, co-founder of the Museum of the American Cocktail, author, lawyer, and so much more. We get to talk about a few of his awesome books, To Have and Have Another, The Manhattan, A Drinkable Feast, but mainly, Philip came on the show because he has a new book out, Sours, a history of strong drink with citrus. Super cool, super fascinating, gentlemen. If you are anywhere in his neck of the woods on March 30th, too, in the show notes, there is a event happening that he's putting on with Dale DeGroff, King Cocktail. Should be fun. Super excited. And without any further ado, let's let Philip Greene explain his drinks and his book in his own words. And thank you for listening. You are a very busy gentleman, co-founder of the Museum of the American Cocktail, multiple books that are fantastic, To Have and Have Another, Drinkable Feast, then there's The Manhattan, and now you got a new book, The Sours. So what has gotten you so into cocktails?
It's a long story, but it's a pretty lucky story, I think. I went to law school at Loyola University, New Orleans, back in 1983 to 86. And I was a history major in college. History is the only thing that I excelled at. So I decided to change my major to history because I got A's in it so I could get into law school. So living in New Orleans in your 20s as someone who likes to eat and drink and loves history, I found myself, soaking up the history and folklore of New Orleans. And I knew my grandmother was born there in 1892. Her name was Marie-Louise Dupré, and so French Creole. And over the years, I just kept reading more and more about New Orleans food and drink, history, folklore, and I finally decided 10 years after I graduated, 1996, to do my grandmother's family tree. And in doing so, I discovered my great-great-grandmother was named Marie-Louise Peychaud, Peychaud. And I'm like, I know that name from Peychaud's Bitters, the Sazerac, and the whole origin story of the cocktail. So I kept researching, discovered that Antoine Peychaud, the pharmacist who allegedly invented the cocktail, was my great-great-grandmother's third cousin.
It counts.
So I'm, distantly related to the guy who, according to New Orleans folklore, first served the cocktail in the 1790s. I come along and I disprove that whole myth by discovering he was born in 1803, came to this country as a baby during the Haitian Revolution, the Saint-Domingue slave uprising. But anyway, it kind of put me on the map as a New Orleans food and New Orleans cocktail historian. I managed to get myself invited to Tales of the Cocktail in 2004, which was the second or third year it was even in existence. And through the then organizer of the event, Ann Rogers, who became Ann Tunerman, she introduced me to Dale DeGroff, Jill DeGroff, Anastasia Miller, Jared Brown, Robert Hess, Ted Hay, Chris and Laura McMillan, and they were talking about starting a cocktail museum, and I managed to be in the right place at the right time with the knowledge I had about cocktail history and Peychaud and the Sazerac. So I fit right in, and it was just incredibly good timing. I mean, there's an old saying, I think it was Casey Stengel or Yogi Berra, luck is the residue of hard work. Well, I worked really hard, figuring out my New Orleans ancestry. Who knew it would matter anything more than just, satisfying my curiosity. So that sort of launched this cocktail historian career that I never would have dreamed would have happened.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
And then at Tales 2008, I did a Hemingway cocktail event, and started pitching the idea of why don't I write I know a lot about Ernest Hemingway, I know a lot about cocktails. The world needs a bartender's guide to the works of Hemingway, which I published in 2012. And then came the Manhattan book in 2016, and A Drinkable Feast in 2018, a book called Cheers in 2022, and then Sours, which came out last year.
Anyone who has not read any of those books, definitely recommend. The one on Ernest Hemingway taught me a lot. It reminded me a lot of my high school reading. I did not minor in English like you did. And then the Manhattan book, just before we get into the Sours, I have been stealing your story. Let me see if I can find it. I told all the bartenders, that new bartender is like, the customer had ordered a Manhattan. The new bartender, years of experience, were weighing down on him, looked at the gentleman for a moment with a puzzled expression, and then said, "I'm sorry, but I cannot mix you a Manhattan cocktail. I haven't an egg in the house." And the bar manager I work with really liked that. But we're here to talk about sours. So you had the idea for sours, as I understand it, in Tales of the Cocktail. Is that correct?
Yeah, you go back to the very first Tales that I attended in 2004, and this was when events were being held at both. Well, they weren't completely centered at the Monteleone the way they were the first 10 or 15 years. I remember going to the Ritz-Carlton at the Library Lounge, and Audrey Saunders, the great Audrey Saunders of Peychaud Club, she had a whiteboard. I mean, this is 2004, so maybe PowerPoint was still a gleam in the eye, but she had a whiteboard where she showed this chart of look at how versatile the sour format is. Here you have rum, lime juice, simple syrup. That's called a daiquiri. Let's swap out the rum and put in tequila, and swap out the simple syrup and put it in Cointreau, and now it's called a margarita. And let's add seltzer water and mint to that daiquiri, and now you've got the mojito. And it just went on, and it was just fascinating that if you can just master this simple three-part formula, and sometimes you can add legs to this bar stool. You can add, the Mai Tai is nothing more than a daiquiri with actually three sweeteners and two types of rum. You got orgeat, you got orange curacao, and two types of rum. You can build out on this platform in so many directions. Seltzer water, or you can use different sweeteners, honey or grenadine or simple syrup or agave syrup. I mean, it goes on, different liqueurs. And it just opened my eyes, 22 years ago. Wow, this is something that could deserve a deep dive. And I've done seminars on the sour before, but it never really occurred to me to do a book on it until about, I guess it was during COVID. My agent and I were brainstorming about what could your next book be, and we had sold the idea of the Cheers book. The Cheers book's a lot of fun. It's probably my most accessible book because it's every day of the year there's an event worth celebrating, a drink connected to it, a toast or a quote, and a song or a video.
Perfect for COVID.
And we pitched it to Union Square publisher, and they were very enthusiastic about it and said, "Do you have any other ideas?" And I said, "Well, this topic, I mean, my Manhattan book is a look at a sacred trinity, spirit, vermouth, bitters. And the sour is the same sort of trinity, sweet, sour, strong. And both of those formats are so adaptable, such a great basis for innovation. You can take the Manhattan, swap out this spirit for that spirit, use an Amaro instead of a vermouth, use a liqueur to sweeten it. It was endless, and the sour is an endless category. So I was very fortunate to be able to write both those books on such classic bedrock drinks. I mean, you look at David Embury's list of the 6 basic cocktails, from David Embury's 1948 book, The Fine Art of Mixing Drinks. I think 3 of them are sours. The Jack Rose, of all things, the Daiquiri, and the Whiskey Sour, I think, are the 3 of the 6. And then you have the Manhattan, Martini, and Old Fashioned. And, I'm lucky that I was able to write about two of those categories of drinks.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed for the martini book, inevitably coming at some point. It strikes me that writing a book like this would be difficult, just based. I think it was David Wondrich who said it's hard to even get things like the facts straight because all the people back then were drinking. It's a part of the, appeal and the allure and the problem with getting bar info. I'm sure it's even difficult just getting the names straight.
I mean, even a contemporary drink like the Cosmopolitan, you have multiple people claiming they invented it. But yeah, cocktail history is such a slippery slope. You have PR departments of Bacardi, let's say, or these brands going back 100 years, wanting you to believe that it was Bacardi used in the original Daiquiri, and it was created at this bar in Santiago, or they want you to believe their Madison Avenue type of stories. And then you have newspapers who, from the 1800s forward, love to write about drinks and bartenders, and it's hard to verify a lot of these things, but it's a lot of fun trying. Dave Wondrich and we're doing an event for Smithsonian in October here in Washington, D.C. on that whole concept of there is no such thing as cocktail history until we say it is. We have to sort of dig into other archives, military history and political history and just regular conventional history to find those little traces of drink origins and when did this drink first appear in what city and who invented, all that kind of stuff is found in other histories, and it's a lot of fun rolling up your sleeves and doing it. And we're lucky we have a lot of great resources, like the EUVS website has vintage cocktail bartending manuals going back to the 1700s. It's nuts what you can find at your fingertips. You could see Jerry Thomas, you can see Harry Johnson, you can see Jacques Straub, you can see Hugo Enslin, all these great books from the 1800s, early 1900s. They're all available at your fingertips because most of them are out of copyright, and you don't need to worry about copyright infringement by posting them online.
We will get right back to Philip and Andrew. I wanted to take a quick moment to say, if you have not had a chance to hit that subscribe button, please do. It'd mean the world to me. All right, back to the conversation. Yes. And, definitely worry about copyright infringement, because I've heard someone named Philip Greene will come after you. You protect quite a few trademarks, I heard, so.
Yeah, I'm a trademark attorney. You can't copyright a drink recipe, but you can trademark it. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I'm fascinated by all that. I am fascinated to, so your criteria that you put for what you would consider to include a drink in the book. I think it was 1/3 of an ounce of citrus. So was there a reason that you had to be so specific when it comes to whether or not you were including something?
I just thought that was a logical cutoff. I mean, I think anything less than that, the citrus is there just to sort of brighten up the drink, but not necessarily as a legitimate, component. And that's what, it's interesting. A lot of people think the Brandy Crusta might have been one of the first sours, but Jerry Thomas only, and how do we know that Santini, when Jerry Thomas learned of Santini's recipe, if he got the amount right? He didn't even get Santini's name right. He called him Santina. But, the Brandy Crusta might have been the predecessor of the Sidecar, but according to Jerry Thomas, it only contains a trace amount, like a dash or something like that of lemon juice. I think in order to be the well-balanced at least three-part drink, to be a sour, you need a significant amount of lemon juice, typically a 1/2 ounce, but I think 1/3 of an ounce was sort of my cutoff. But that's not dispositive of anything.
The section that you wrote about the difference between the Collins and the Cooler is the one that's popping to my mind, where essentially you kind of land on, what's the difference between these two? They just are. At a certain point, you just kind of have to say, like, okay, we're moving on. Some people say it's this, some people say it's that. What's the difference between a buck and a mule? Well, ale and ginger beer kind of, but then, some people make it differently. Let's just keep going.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of terms like punch that, okay, we think of punch as being in a big old punch bowl, but sometimes you have a planter's punch, which is in a glass. It's just a lot of these terms um, don't have any rigid rules about this is absolutely what this means, because they're often used interchangeably. Anyway, it's all part of the challenge, I guess.
Well, so jumping into the book, I think, two of kind of the big drinks in the book, and they're drinks that even the uninitiated, like, drink historian will be familiar with. I thought it'd be useful if we talked a little bit about daiquiris and margaritas. I like how when you're discussing them, you kind of talk about how even in the dark ages before mixology kind of started shining the light, fresh fruit and better practices, these drinks survived, albeit maybe not in their brightest and best forms, but daiquiris and some frozen concoction on, like, in the French Quarter did survive, and margaritas, maybe it was mixto tequila and maybe it was sweet and sour mix, but at least those two drinks held on to the public in a way that some of the other drinks didn't. And so I was hoping you could dig into those two a little bit.
There are a couple drinks, yeah, the daiquiri and the margarita, in spite of how poorly they were made. I mean, it's almost the same with McDonald's hamburger. No one's ever going to say a McDonald's hamburger is a great hamburger, but McDonald's certainly made the hamburger iconic and world famous, and maybe it served as a placeholder for so many years for craft to come back to that, dish. It's the same with the daiquiri and the margarita. I mean, yeah, we all know how poorly made a daiquiri can be with powdered mix or artificially flavored sweet and sour mix and anything but real lime as a product name is sort of a misnomer because there's nothing real about it. You look at a drink like the gimlet and the grapefruit soda tequila drink. I'm trying to think of the name of it. Both of those, in their original form, were not as good as the Paloma. Thank you. Both of those drinks, in their original expression, aren't as good as they could be, and they've sort of. Oh, you want to make a gimlet the authentic way? You use real, Rose's lime juice. Well, we know it's lime juice cordial, and gin. Well, that's the authentic one, but don't you think it'll taste better if you use freshly squeezed lime juice? Of course it will. The original Paloma was made with something like Fresca. I think it was called Wink. A grapefruit soda, which may or may not have had authentic grapefruit juice. Squirt, you're right, thank you. A tasty drink, but back in the day, probably made with mixto, 51% agave-based tequila and, a grapefruit soda, which we could make better now if we made it from scratch. But, well, that's the original authentic way to make it. So it depends what you want, authenticity or better flavor. But yeah, the daiquiri and the margarita both survived the bad old days and maintained, I remember making them in the 80s with just stuff from the freezer, the frozen limeade, not knowing that I could make a much better drink by just cutting a lime in half, So it is a testament to the drink and whether Jimmy Buffett helped put it on the map, the margarita or the daiquiri. I mean, both of those drinks have survived in spite of being made so poorly for so many years.
This is the thing about progress. People look back to the past and remember a time when things were simpler. But even when you were talking about that, I was thinking for some reason about beer, and been reading about beer lately. It used to be beer wasn't brewed even with hops. They do different aromatic herbs, and the shelf life was something insanely short, like just a couple of weeks. And yeah, it's not the tradition that we grew up with, but there's a reason we switched over. It's a lot better. Also, another drink that you mentioned in there, the Mai Tai. You even have places that are putting out different things that say like, our Mai Tai proudly doesn't have any fruit juice in it, and it's like, okay, yeah, maybe the modern edition is a little bit better if you go back to a little bit higher quality. So yeah, I do. So the Margarita, what was this really a thing? Like, that was one of the twists on the Margarita, and I wanted to ask you about that.
I didn't. I've not written about that yet. There's so many. Like I said, it's a bottomless category. If I missed a pop culture phenom like the Jaeger Rita, I shame on me. But I can see the Margarita being a flexible enough drink where you could plug in, a bitter like Jägermeister or something like that.
This is actually a drink that you mentioned towards the end of your Margarita section. Yeah, I know. It probably a last minute addition or something. I'm like, yeah, we don't have to dwell on it, but I was like, this is incredible. I would have never ever expected.
Oh, you're right. The Jägerita, basically a margarita made with Jägermeister in place of the tequila. Okay, I wrote this book 2 years ago and I forgot I snuck that in there. That's funny. Touche.
Well, I mean, you write a book with, what is it, like 200 recipes in it and all sorts of variations. There's going to be some stuff that falls through the cracks. I don't think I've ever run a full shift without looking up at least one strange drink someone asked me about.
Well, of course. That was one area where I was told, look, you can do 110 drinks, where you devote a page or two to that drink. But I recognized that this is such a bottomless category, and I needed to put in so many of the chapters something called variations, where, well, if you use this instead of that, now it becomes a this. And if you swap out the honey syrup for the simple syrup, now it becomes so many drinks. You have these wild card ingredients where just changing, it's a French 75, but if you use this instead of that, it now becomes the flying cocktail, which was Ian Fleming's favorite drink when he lived in Munich back in the 1920s or something like that. So I recognized that I could shoehorn in a lot of other drinks by reference by using this variations category.
Yeah. Or if you're in New Orleans, add cognac. Did you have any mixed thoughts about adding the Midori sour?
I wanted to have like a broad range of drinks, even though some of them are from the bad old days. It's still a classic. It's still a sour, and I didn't want to dwell on a lot of them, but having that in there I thought was important because it was part of what kept the category going, in the 70s, 80s. Even though it's not a drink that I would gravitate toward, I wanted to show sort of the breadth and scope of the sour category by offering drinks like that. And by offering, Jeffrey Morgenthaler's updated, improved amaretto sour, that's another one where maybe the original was iconic and all that, but maybe it's not as drinkable as you might want it to be. But if you add a little bourbon to it, it becomes sublime, So I felt like I owed it to the category to talk about a lot of the iconic sours, even though they're not something I want to drink.
Now, that is something that we are all definitely indebted to Jeffrey Morgenthaler for. That's a really great drink, and who knew it'd only take just a little bit of high proof bourbon? Like, that's all it needs, and then it's right back and balanced. Did you, when you were putting together the book, I don't remember if you mentioned this, maybe you did, but did you settle on alphabetically listing the drinks just because you did, like, it's just an easy presentation method? Did you ever consider different ways of listing the drinks?
Yeah, and it goes back to my Hemingway book where, deciding on structure is the first hurdle. With Hemingway, I thought, okay, should I do gin drinks? Should I do drinks from a certain era of his life? Should I do, and then I just decided, no, just give it alphabetically. That's how I did the Hemingway book. That's how I did the Paris book, a drinkable feast. And, like I thought about, should I start with, here are the classic 3-part sours, and here are the classic 4-part sours and 5-part sours. No, that just was too cumbersome. Just go alphabetically. Here's the aviation, here's the bee's knees, here's the caipirinha. Just alphabetically going through these classics was probably the most workable way. I had this one guy criticize my Paris book, saying, you should have offered the drinks chronologically and from what arrondissement in Paris. I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Because, first of all, you don't know chronologically sometimes. And, okay, let's start with the champagne cocktail that goes back to the 1850s. But it just doesn't make sense. Anyway, I digress. I think alphabetically was just the easiest way. And if you're looking for the drink, why not just go to the B section for bee's knees, and it's so much easier.
Yeah. Dude, I felt like we had a really good kinship. I feel like I understand your sense of humor. Your section on the punctuation of the bee's knees, that the fact that you noticed that the apostrophe happened after the S, so he must have been referring to multiple B's, multiple knees. And I laughed about that, just so you know. So
on the same page of the 1936 book, The Artistry of Mixing Drinks, he has the bee's kiss and the bee's knees next to each other, and they're both punctuated differently, which doesn't make any sense. So it's the kiss of one bee and the knees of multiple bees, if you're a punctuation fanatic.
There might be a narrative there. The narrative, unfortunately, might be that alcohol is one hell of a drug. But Tom Collins. So I have heard from a bar mentor back in the day that there was this thing that happened where people would go and say, Tom Collins is talking trash about you down at the pub. But I'd never seen it written out in such detail. Do you mind kind of walking us through what the whole inside joke about Tom Collins was?
Yeah, so it was the spring of 1874, if memory serves. It was, this prank that went viral, so to speak, back in the U.S., where people would say, "Did you hear Tom Collins was bad mouthing you? Go get him." And it ended up with at least one fatality where someone was so angry that he was being bad-mouthed by, I don't owe Tom Collins any money. Who is this person, Tom Collins? I'm gonna go shoot him, or that sort of thing. Or people would very cheekily say, come to the Broadway show tonight. Tom Collins is going to make an appearance. It became this whole thing where people were dropping the name Tom Collins just to get a reaction. And the cool thing is you can go to an archival newspaper like newspapers.com, a website, and look up old newspapers and search for Tom Collins and see. I mean, I could have written multiple pages on funny uses of the term Tom Collins, and I'll be talking about that at the event that we'll talk about later in Connecticut a couple weeks from now. Just some of these things were really resourceful marketing and advertising methods to get people to come to their business because, Tom Collins is going to be there, but it didn't last very long. It was like May, June of 1874, and at a certain point, people got tired of it. People knew it wasn't surprising anybody or tricking anybody anymore, and it just sort of faded away. But it was kind of like the ALS bucket plunge. You dump a bucket of water over yourself to raise money for Lou Gehrig's disease. It lasted for a little while, and then it went away.
No, that's awesome. I think that actually is a pretty great point. What do you have coming up with Dale DeGroff? You've got an exciting event. For those of you who listen or are listening, I'll include it in the show notes. And if you're watching this on one of our clips, I'll have it here. But yeah, what do you have coming up with Dale DeGroff?
Thank you. So there's a suburb of New Haven, Connecticut called Branford. My sister and brother-in-law and their family used to live in East Haven, which is right next to Branford. It's a beautiful little town. There's a great restaurant there called the Lockworks Tavern. And on Monday, March 30th, Dale DeGroff, the king of cocktails, he and I are doing a seminar on the sour cocktail format. The the basis of this book. And I'll be signing copies of the book, selling those. Dale and I are going to, do a very fun, informative, not too long PowerPoint on sort of the history of citrus fruit, going back to Italy, North Africa, France. Citrus was such a status symbol. Having a lemon tree in your yard, I mean, it was the mark of having arrived if you had a lemon grove or something like that. And the use of lemons and limes in punch, going back to colonial India in the 1600s, and punch becoming the drink of social drinking, in London and in the U.S. all through the 1600s, 1700s, and then how punch sort of became distilled, no pun intended, down into single-sized drinks once you got into the 1800s, and the bartenders recognizing so many great drinks on the large format could be made on the small format, because I made the analogy, you don't join your friends to play 4 holes of golf. You don't play an hour of poker. You're in it for the duration. You're playing 9 holes, you're playing 18 holes. You're playing poker for the whole evening. You're not going to win the first 5 hands and say, "See you later, guys." That's how drinking used to be. You'd go to a gathering, you'd be around the punch bowl until it was empty, and that's just what the concept of drinking was about. But you get into the Industrial Revolution, the 1800s, people are on the go. They might just want to have one drink, and so many punches, were offered as sours, individual-sized drinks. And so we'll be doing this whole overview of sours. We're going to be making some classics like the Daiquiri, that goes back 126 years, something like that. We'll be doing the whiskey sour. We'll be doing some modern classics like the Paper Plane and the Jungle Bird. And we'll also be talking about a category that Dale DeGroff invigorated or breathed new life into in the 1990s, and it continues today, the smash. The original whiskey smash was nothing more than a smaller sized mint julep. By adding lemon juice to it, Dale recreated the smash category. So a bartender named Anthony DeSario is going to be doing his pineapple smash, and we'll be talking about a lot of contemporary, the gin basil smash from Georg Meyer in Germany. It's a category that's still producing some great new drinks.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that'll be Monday, March 30th at Lockworks Tavern in Branford, Connecticut, and you can go to you can RSVP at info@lockworkstavern.com. It's a free event. It's no charge, but mostly for the bartending world. But if you can make it, we'd love to see you.
That's, I think, just kind of a no-brainer. So if you're listening to this, if you didn't have something to write that down with, I will have that in the show notes. If you see this as a clip on social media, I'll have the poster right there with the link and who to contact in the notes on whatever platform you're on. So yeah, definitely go. I mean, to the iconic cocktail people in the world telling you all about the history of citrus and making you drinks. What could go wrong? I was thinking as you were talking about that that you mentioned that I think it was punch you describe as a marathon and cocktails as a sprint. And I think that's another good analogy there. I was thinking, we could go through your book kind of cocktail by cocktail. There's a lot of different ways we could talk about the sour books or any of your other books. I thought it'd be interesting to kind of, towards the end here, as we're wrapping it up, make sure there's something that we, is there anything that we miss that you'd be sad or think unfortunate that we didn't bring up in this conversation?
No, it's funny. I'm not a bartender. I'm not a professional bartender. I can make a really good drink, and I've invented some pretty good drinks, but I'm not a career bartender. So I learned a lot while writing this book about current trends. Bartenders have, remember that the book was written about 2 or 3 years ago, but butterfly pea flour, for example, or the use of the liquid that comes in a can of garbanzo beans or chickpeas, aquafaba. I had no idea that could be used in place of egg white in getting that emulsion or getting that frothiness in your drink. So I learned a lot about trends, about super juice, about making the most use out of your citrus fruit. Because, in my mind, it's just a matter of you cut a lime in half, squeeze the juice of the half of a lime, discard the hull unless you're making a drink that calls for the hull being in there. But that's wasteful, and there's a lot of flavor in the zest. You don't want the pith, you don't want the white part, but the green part or the yellow part, a lot of flavor there. So why can't we use malic acid or different types of acids to extract even more flavor? And writing about things like shrubs and things like that do similar things, where you're making as much use of the components of the citrus fruit as you can to maximize flavor and get more out of your investment. So those were things that were fun to encounter and write about. Yeah, I tried to write about drinks that maybe you've never heard of because they were invented by a bartender you've never heard of, but I wanted to be able to show some of these unknown but still delicious drinks as sort of an incentive or an encouragement to bartenders to innovate on their own and make their own new drinks, because it's really an endless category. And I put a lot of drinks in there that made their debut, not just because I wanted my friends to get some attention, but just to show this is such a versatile format. There's so many drinks out there, and you can walk into a bar or a restaurant and see a handful of sours that you might be interested in trying because this is this bartender's expression of this classic, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
It's not just for bartenders, too. I'm pretty sure there's a drink in there by Philip Greene at some point. So anyone can use that sours cocktail category to innovate. And I think the book kind of reads like a who's who of the bar world, too. A couple of people have been on the show, the Jared Miller and the Anastasia. Kate Gerwin, old friend from Albuquerque. So I was like, hey, yeah. So it was cool to see, a bunch of really big names in there contributing different things. So it really, really could not recommend more. So thank you for all your work there. Someone listening at home and want to know more about you, what you do, find out more about your books, where should they go?
So I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and my website's at Philip with one L, Philip, J for James, Philip J. Greene, Greene. No one's ever going to mispronounce my name, but they're always going to misspell it. They'll put two L's in Philip and forget the E on the end of Greene. So Philip with one L, J, Greene with an E on the end.com is my website. But you can find me on Twitter, or whatever it's called these days, X, Instagram, Facebook. And if you want to reach out, you can do it through the website or through Messenger or something like that. But so I retired last year. Was the trademark attorney for the Marine Corps at the Pentagon. When the ability to work from home was taken away so abruptly, I was nearing retirement age anyway, and I just said, well, I'm not going into the Pentagon 5 days a week while my wife and daughters are up at our vacation house in Michigan all summer. So I think it's time for me to go. And I haven't regretted it at all. I had a great legal career, but I'm still doing trademark work on the side. But having a little bit more time for writing, I'm writing for Men's Journal. I just put out an article a couple weeks ago on the Hurricane cocktail, a sour. Was it invented at Pat O'Brien's, like Pat O'Brien's wants you to believe, back during World War II? Well, they certainly embraced it during World War II, but it may have been invented in northern Wisconsin, of all places. So check out at a rustic lakeside resort. So check out my Men's Journal article on the Hurricane that came out just a couple weeks ago.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Philip Greene, thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to come talk to us. And it was a pleasure to get a little more acquainted with your work again and just to get to meet you. And I hope anyone listening really, really enjoys your work, gets to discover some of those things. And if you didn't have the ability to write those things down again, they are going to be in the show notes. Philip, have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening. That is today's episode. Now, if you have not taken a moment to check out our website, please do. It's servesyouRightPod.com. We have past episodes and all sorts of other things there. If you want to get in touch with me, that's the place to do it. I do appreciate that you've given me your most valuable asset, your time and attention. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned. We have some really cool guests coming up. I would hate it if you missed it. Cheers.